Mr. Groom.
Thank you, Your Honor.
One second, please.
Your Honors, before the break, I was...
One second, please, Mr. Groom. 1 second. Has Mr. Mladić, can you hear me? Yes.
I can hear you.
Observed and was further informed about inappropriate interaction between the public gallery and Mr. Mladić. Now, I'm refraining from any observation as who initiated that, whether that was the public gallery or whether it's you, Mr. Mladić. It may have been both. We're not going to. You are hinting at it was the public gallery. Now, the best way of not having to respond to that is just to focus on what happens in this courtroom rather than to look at the public gallery. The chamber at this moment doesn't find it necessary to put any measure in place, but if it would continue, and I'm therefore also addressing the public gallery, that if interaction is sought, whether from the public gallery or from the courtroom, that the solution would be to put a screen between Mr. Mladić and the public gallery so as to avoid, in whatever direction, such inappropriate interactions. So therefore, please refrain from it. And Mr. Mladić, you can protect yourself if there would be any initiative from the public gallery. You can, by focusing on what Mr. Grooms is telling or by focusing on what happens in the courtroom, there'll be less reason to respond if anything would be there. Then, Mr. Groom, are you ready to proceed?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, just prior to the break, I was discussing the JNA's involvement in the events during the spring of 1992. Now before you on slide 43 is a report from the JNA reporting how the JNA and its armed units created and coordinated by the SDS have worked together to take over the town of Vlasenica, or liberated, to use the reporter's term. The willingness of individual commanders to engage JNA troops and resources on the Serb side was watched carefully by senior Serb politicians like Milosevic and Karadzic. As the time drew near to build a Bosnian Serb Army, the officers selected from the JNA ranks to lead it were chosen in part because they had already demonstrated their competence and commitment to the goal of creating a Bosnian Serb state using military might. During this entire period, forces of the territorial defense or reserve units were subordinated to the JNA and then the VRS. Similarly, the Bosnian Serb police were also at different times working closely with the JNA and the VRS, and in some instances were formally subordinated to them. As Karadzic would say in 1995, quote, "Gentlemen, we got the officers we asked for. I asked for Mladić," unquote. The choice of Mladić as commander wasn't a random one. Karadzic chose Mladić because he believed him to be an excellent officer, capable of commanding the planned Bosnian Serb Army, and because Karadzic believed he was willing to commit the crimes needed to achieve the strategic goals of Bosnian Serb leaders. In this particular entry from Mladić's military notebooks on slide 45, we can see that Mr. Mladić recorded the comments of JNA General Momčilo Perisic at a meeting in which there is a discussion of Mladić as a commander for a Bosnian Serb army. He records Perisic as saying that Perisic and Ninković undertook an initiative with Karadzic for Mladić to command the new Bosnian Serb army. Mladić records Perisic as saying, quote, "You have the right person. If you support him, you will get what you want." Unquote. Quote. You will get what you want. What they wanted was someone who would reinforce their hold on territories taken to date and advance the strategic goals already being implemented. On the 12th of May, 1992, when the VRS was established, the JNA withdrew from Bosnia. The JNA left behind most of its weapons and thousands of troops to the just established VRS. It continued to pay the salaries of nearly the entire VRS officer corps, including Mladić, Galić, Krstić, Talić, and other senior officers you will learn about in this trial. The prosecution will lead evidence establishing that within hours of the creation of the VRS, it was able to adapt the communication systems and the command and control systems of the JNA. The main staff of the VRS was able to effectively issue commands and receive reports from subordinate units within hours. Slide 46 depicts the senior leadership of the VRS. The top row identifies the members of its main staff, and the second row, the commanders of the 6 corps and its Air Force. A more complete organizational chart depicting the structure of the VRS can be found on page 28 of the prosecution pretrial brief. On the copy now before you, the 1st Krajina Corps, the Drina Corps, the Sarajevo Romania Corps, and the East Bosnia Corps are marked in red. These are the corps that are most relevant to the indictment. A comprehensive chronology of Mr. Mladić's professional career can also be found in the pre-trial brief at page 24. I will now describe some of the crimes for which Mr. Mladić is charged. Crimes directly perpetrated by soldiers under his command. I will not discuss all of the crimes or describe them in any particular detail. I will mention just a few to illustrate, in a general sense, the types of crimes that were committed. I will use the strategic objectives as a framework and will begin with the second objective. I am leaving the first objective until the end because it permeates the others. There was a large concentration of Serbs in the Krajina prior to the war. Bosnian Serb leaders recognized that if this population was to be a viable part of a Bosnian Serb state, it had to be physically connected to it. The second objective was to create this physical connection. The indictment specifically enumerates crimes which occurred in 5 municipalities, although not all within the corridor. They are all related to this particular objective. Prijedor, Sanski Most, Ključ, Banja Luka, and Kotovaroš. 2 of the most important municipalities in the Krajina were Prijedor and Sanski Most. Both had Muslim majorities and were adjacent to Banja Luka, a municipality with a strong Serb majority. The initial takeover of the 2 municipalities took place in April of 1992. These municipalities would see some of the worst ethnic cleansing. The JNA played a significant part in the initial takeover of the municipalities. Then Colonel Momir Talić, one of Mladić's most trusted officers, personally participated in the takeover of Sanski Most. A few weeks later, after the creation of the VRS, Talić would be responsible for brutal attacks against Muslims in Prijedor. At the end of May, shortly after Mladić assumed the position of commander of the main staff of the VRS, approximately 50 soldiers set up howitzers and shelled the villages of Hurstra and Vrpolje in Sanski Most. They returned the next week to burn the non-Serb houses. They captured about 20 boys and men, marched them to Vrpolje Bridge, made them strip, and then jump from the bridge. They shot each of the men as they entered the water. May I draw your attention to a weekly report from the Security Services Center, now shown on slide 48. The Security Services Center is the regional headquarters of the police in western Bosnia and was located in Banja Luka. It describes the retaliatory attack against the civilian population after 2 Serb soldiers were killed. Quote, "The army carried out an artillery attack on the village of Hambarin and mopped up the area. The army engaged in a mopping up operation. Several hundred inhabitants of these villages were killed or wounded." Unquote. On the 1st of June in Ključ, the Bosnian Serb Army completed the shelling and the ransacking of villages in the area of Veligici, a bombardment that lasted approximately 4 days. An order was given for all Muslim men near the Veligici school to come to the police station. About 77 unarmed men assembled there. Again, in a process that would be repeated throughout the conflict, they were forced to remove their valuables, their identifications, and were murdered there in front of the school. In front of the police station. Slide 49 is a report from Talić to his superiors at the main staff. It is dated the 14th of June, 1992. Here Talić informs Mladić that the greatest difficulty they face is not armed resistance. The most difficult situation they face is that there are now security and logistical problems because efforts to expel refugees have failed. They failed to expel all of the targeted population because of problems with buses and the fact that some people refused to leave their homes. If I can return to Ključ for a moment, It is also a good example of how Mladić monitored the progress of the ethnic cleansing campaign. On the 8th of January 1992, here shown on slide 50, Mladić notes that the ethnic population of Cluj is comprised of 17,000 Muslims and 3,000 Croats. Once again, at this point in time, Mr. Mladić is based in Knin, Croatia. Slide 51 is from Mladić's military notebook and records a report he received from Jovo Banjac, president of Cluj municipality. Banjac told him that there used to be 17,000 Muslims in Cluj. Now there are only 5,000. Mladić went on to note that he was told that 1,500 people had departed that very day, the 11th of September, 1992. Slide 52 shows the next report he receives on progress in Cluj municipality. It is about 7 weeks after the last report. Here, the number of Muslims has been further reduced to 2,000. In slide 53, we see a document from the 1st of July, 1992. Only 6 weeks into Mladić's stewardship of the VRS. In it, he pays tribute to the successes of Serb forces cleansing the area. Quote, "I'd like to pay tribute and express my gratitude to all soldiers, commanding officers of the 1st Krajina Corps and Eastern Bosnia Corps, members of Air Force and anti-aircraft defense of the Serbian Republic of BiH Army, as well as civilian Serbian population in the combat activity zone, for successfully organized and implemented operation for breakthrough, expansion, and cleansing of corridor in Bosanska Posavina between eastern and western Bosnia, as well as excogitation and organized joint action and coordination of combat unit activities," unquote. On 10 July 1992, almost 2 months after Mladić took command, VRS soldiers surrounded the village of Berkici in Cluj. Men between 16 and 60 were separated from their families and detained in a nearby meadow. They were marched to the elementary school in Biljani. Once preparations for killing them were in place, they were loaded in groups of 5 into a bus. The bus was driven to a field, and as the men were forced off the bus, they could see the bodies of those killed before them. They were murdered as they left the bus. A survivor will describe that day how he threw himself to the ground and pretended to be dead. As he lay there, he heard the sound of earth-moving equipment. Another survivor of this massacre will describe during the trial hearing one of the soldiers comment to another, "It's all going according to plan." By the end of July 1992, just 10 weeks after the Bosnian Serb Army was created, General Talić considered that he had completed his task. Slide 54, now on the screen before you, is a report of the 1st Krajina Corps, dated the 24th of July, 1992. We read, quote, "We have liberated the territories we consider our own," unquote. The territory being referred to was land upon which people of several ethnicities lived, farming their lands, raising their children, land forcibly taken, the rightful owners murdered or thrown into detention camps, forced to leave the area. The report goes on to describe that a centuries-old aspiration has been fulfilled, one referred to in modern times as strategic objective number 2. On the screens before you on slide 55 is a report from the archives of the 1st Krajina Corps, reporting on what happened in Grabovica to Elvedin Passage's family and others, the incident I described at the beginning of this opening. We can see that the commanders in the 1st Krajina Corps fully appreciated the crime that was perpetrated there. Quote, massacre of the captured members of the Green Berets started because of the wounding of 4 and killing of 1 soldier, and the burning of the wounded soldiers. Measures to prevent further massacres were taken, with the exception of Kotovaros, where we have taken serious intentions to prevent a genocide of Muslims. Women and children from the area have been allowed to pass through Travnik. The 3rd objective was to establish a corridor of Serb-held lands in eastern Bosnia. The 3rd objective envisaged that this land would become Serb-controlled and populated with Serbs. The indictment charges a representative group of crimes committed in 7 municipalities, including Mladić's hometown of Kilinovic. Let me call once again to the screen the demographic map from 1991. You can see the area falling within the 3rd objective in the circle on the right. Here we can see that it is predominantly green, indicating Muslim majorities. By the time Mladić was appointed the commander of the main staff on the 12th of May, most of the municipalities within the 3rd objectives were under Serb control. His attention was turned fully to ethnically cleansing the area. In November 1992, Mladić would sign Directive Number 4, ordering the VRS to force that part of the population in Birac, Žepa, and Gorazde areas that were Muslim to leave. Quote, the Drina Corps, from its present positions, its main forces shall persistently defend Visegrad, the dam, Zvornik, and the corridor, while the rest of its forces in the wider Podrinja region are to exhaust the enemy, inflict the heaviest possible losses on them, and force them, with the Muslim population, to leave the Birac, Žepa, and Gorazde areas. As can be seen in this directive, the Muslim population is directly made a target of military operations. What you see before you on slide 59 is an order from the 28th of May, 1992, issued by the commander of the Birac Brigade. It refers to the area around Zvornik, Bratunac, and Vlasnica. The order makes clear that the expulsion of the predominantly Muslim population who lived and worked in eastern Bosnia was to be organized and coordinated. Women and children would be moved out, the men placed in detention centers for exchange. Quote, "The moving out of the Muslim population must be organized and coordinated. Only women and children can move out, while men fit for military service are to be placed in camps for exchange." On the 2nd of June, Bosnian Serb forces, supported by armored personnel carriers and machine guns, attacked the small hamlet of Drum in Vlasnica. Soldiers went from house to house, killing every man they could find. They found about 20. All of them but one was shot in the forehead. On the 6th of July, 1992, non-Serbs from Mladić's hometown of Kalinovic were moved from a school to an ammunition depot in the village of Jelešako Polje. VRS soldiers guarded them. After a month, around the 5th of August, the men were loaded onto trucks after having had their hands bound with wire. They were driven to an open field and killed. Approximately 20 men died. Slide 60 is an excerpt of the evidence of Fazia Hadzic. Fazia pretended to be dead after he was shot in the leg. Quote, "Now the remaining Muslim was ordered to pour accelerant over the bodies and set them alight. He refused to set light to us. He was pleading with them to spare his life. The sound of his voice will stick in my mind forever. They just shot him dead, and he was added to the pile of bodies." Unquote. On the 22nd of September, 1992, the VRS 2nd Romania Brigade surrounded the town of Novosioci. There was no armed resistance. After Bosnian Serb soldiers had full control of the town, one of them read an order that the women and children were to be placed on buses and moved out of the area. The men were told that they would remain and would do forced labor. After the women and children were taken away, all of the men were murdered. The realization of the third strategic objective was almost complete in 1992. The large population centers of Muslims had been largely emptied. Slide 61 shows an entry from Mladić's military notebook. In it, we can see him noting a report about how the project of ethnic cleansing has progressed in Foča. Here, Miroslav Stanić of the Foča War Presidency informs him that the ethnic makeup of Foča has changed from 49% Serb before the war to 99% as of the 17th of September, 1992. Over 20,000 Muslims removed from the municipality. Crimes of sexual violence were an integral part of the process of taking over and ethnically cleansing Bosnia. While women were most often targeted for such crimes of terrible violation, men were also victimized. Sometimes the perpetrators sexually assaulted the victims. On other occasions, the perpetrators forced the victims to perform sexual acts on others, including relatives. The indictment against Mladić charges crimes of sexual violence, focusing on the crimes of sexual violence perpetrated in Foča, where the systematic rapes of women were commonplace. Slide 62 includes an excerpt from the testimony of RM 070, evidence the prosecution will seek to tender in this case. Quote, I didn't even look to see who had come or who had left the room. The world should see to look in our eyes. They had killed my mother before that. They had killed my brother. And up to that day, I had been raped by almost 50 of them.